When you think about all the medical conditions that could happen to us over time, the very last one we'd want to get is Alzheimer's or dementia. Because when you lose your ability to think, to remember, to relate, you've lost everything and everyone that ever mattered to you. And yet Alzheimer's is the epidemic of our time. We are seeing more and more of it, not just in the United States, but all around the world. Alzheimer's and dementia have gotten much more common in recent years. And not just because baby boomers are aging. Since 1980 to the year 2010, according to the Centers for Disease Control, there's been a 55% increase in the age-adjusted death rate for Alzheimer's across the country. From 16.5 deaths per 100,000 people in 1999 to 25.4 deaths per 100,000 people in 2014 after accounting for age. The states with the highest death rates were primarily in the Southwest, Midwest, and West Coast. Let's take a look at this map and break it down by a few states. In Missouri, you can see in 1999, there were 15 deaths per 100,000, and in 2014, that rose to 27.4 deaths per 100,000, an almost 83% rise. Across the state line in Kansas, there were 16.6 deaths per 100,000 in 1999 and 21.9 deaths per 100,000 in 2014, an increase of almost a third. A couple of states with the biggest increase were in the southeastern United States. Mississippi went from 13.3 deaths per 100,000 in 1999 up to 35.2 deaths per 100,000 in 2014, an astonishing 164.1% increase. And across the Mississippi River in the natural state, Arkansas experienced an unnatural rise in the number of Alzheimer's deaths. The rate rose from 14.8 deaths per 100,000 in 1999 up to 34.8 deaths per 100,000 in 2014, an astonishing 134.5% increase in Arkansas. Now, on the other side of the coin, a couple of the states that actually decreased, the precious few, were our friends up in Montana, who went from 21.3 deaths per 100,000 in 1999 down to 19.2 deaths per 100,000 in 2014, an almost 10% decrease. And up in Maine, if you're just looking for another excuse to move there, the death rate decreased from 29.6 per 100,000 in 99 down to 22.7 per 100,000 in 2014, a 23.5% decrease. Must be something in the water. Again, there are no drugs available to prevent Alzheimer's, but there are things we can do to protect against the disease. Doctors and scientists understand more about Alzheimer's now than they ever have before. They have made several breakthroughs in the past decade about learning how to control it. Research shows that you can cut your risk of developing dementia and Alzheimer's by as much as half by making some ordinary, everyday lifestyle changes. In 1993, the Chicago Health and Aging Project recruited a large number of people and carefully followed what they ate over time. Researchers looked to see who stayed mentally clear and who did not. The first thing they looked at was the amount of saturated fat in the volunteers' diet. Saturated fat is a type of fat that's solid at room temperature. A good example is bacon grease. You can tell it's high in saturated fat because after you cook the bacon, what do you do with the leftover grease? That's right, most of us pour it into a glass jar and save it for later. And we don't bother to refrigerate it because we know once it hits room temperature, it will solidify. And that's a sign it's very high in saturated fat. There's a lot of saturated fat in bacon, but the number one source of saturated fats is actually dairy products. Cheese, milk, and yogurt are the principal contributors of saturated fat. It's also in meat and chocolate. Now in Chicago, some people ate relatively little saturated fat, about 13 grams a day, while others ate much more, 25 grams a day. The question is, does that affect the risk of developing Alzheimer's? Well, of course it does. As you can see from this chart, the people who ate the most saturated fat had 3.5 times the risk of Alzheimer's compared to the low group. So, where's all this saturated fat coming from? Well, it adds up quickly. If you have 2 eggs, that's about 3 grams. 1 slice of bacon, and who have you ever met that has just 1 slice of bacon, is about 1 gram. A skinless chicken thigh is about 4.5 grams. A glass of whole milk, another 4.5 grams. And a pizza for one is 12 grams. Before you know it, suddenly you're in the high group. Well, maybe you're sitting there and saying to yourself, not so fast, my friend. What about all these headlines I've seen lately that say it's good to eat butter, bacon, and cheese? Which raises the question, should we be eating saturated fat or not? And does eating saturated fat raise your risk for Alzheimer's? Or is it just junk science? Think to yourself, does this pass the common sense test? So you've probably heard the old expression, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Well, this might be a case where that holds true, because all science is not created equally. There's evidence-based science, and there are theories of science. And if it doesn't pass your common sense test, it probably doesn't make sense, and you need to be careful, because you just have this one chance to get it right. You can't adopt something and get to the end of it, find it doesn't work, and suddenly hit the reset button. It just doesn't work that way. And it's not just Alzheimer's that's on the rise. The number of people suffering from mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, is also skyrocketing. MCI is a situation where you suffer from a lot of mental lapses later on in life. Folks are still able to cook for themselves, to live on their own. They're still managing, but even the simplest daily tasks can become very challenging. Researchers in Finland decided to look at MCI. They followed more than 1,300 adults at an average age of 50 and tracked their fat intake for more than 20 years. Some of the folks ate a little saturated fat, some ate a lot. And the results showed that it wasn't just Alzheimer's that saturated fat affects. The researchers found the same problems in the volunteer with high saturated fat diets that resulted in mental lapses that hit them when they're older. The fattier your diet, the more likely you are to have brain problems. This also applied to people with an elevated genetic risk, folks with the APOE epsilon 4 gene, that if you have this gene from one parent, you're at 3 times the risk for getting Alzheimer's, and if you get it from both parents, you're at 10 to 15 times the risk. Looking only at people who had the APOE epsilon 4 gene, researchers found the same kind of difference. People who avoided saturated fat over time had a much lower risk of developing not just Alzheimer's, but old age memory problems. And remember, these are the people who had a significantly elevated genetic risk. Those who avoided bad fats cut their risk of developing dementia by 80%. So what researchers are saying is that your genes are not your destiny. The genes for Alzheimer's and dementia can be affected, but now is the time to start doing something about it. Research shows that Alzheimer's starts doing damage to your brain 10, 15, maybe even 20 years before the first symptoms occur. This preventative approach is not perfect, but it's a lot more than what we used to know. Now let's take a look inside the brain, in between the brain cells and down between the neurons. You can see these little black clouds in the brain of a person who's got Alzheimer's that are called amyloid plaques, and they are a hallmark of the disease. But how do they get there? That's the trillion-dollar question. They're made up of protein strands from brain cells that get broken off. They're sticky, and they clump together in these little balls called beta amyloid plaques. Then they start destroying the connections from one cell to the next. But what else is in these brain cells? There's the protein, there's cholesterol, but there's also something else. There's iron and copper and other metals. You have iron in your body normally because the body takes the iron and makes hemoglobin out of it. Hemoglobin is what makes the blood red and carries oxygen from place to place, including your brain. But if you have too much iron, it's toxic. What happens if you leave an iron skillet out in the rain? That's right, it rusts. And that rust is a sign that the iron is unstable, so there's oxidation. The iron in your body does the exact same thing. it oxidizes and produces things called free radicals. Free radicals are simple molecules like oxygen molecules, but in your body, they lose an electron and become unstable, which turns them into rogue molecules that act like little fires that burn anything they come into contact with, destroying connections between cells. So these free radicals are molecules that have become destabilized, and too much iron in your body facilitates that. Next question is, does copper oxidize? Think of what happens to a shiny new penny as it gets older. It gets darker, right? So that's oxidation of the penny. So copper and iron are similar. They oxidize very easily, and when they do, they release free radicals into your brain, into the brain of a person with Alzheimer's, with those clumps of amyloid plaques. And inside those amyloid plaques are iron and copper molecules causing chaos in the brain, destroying connections and destroying the brain's ability to function. There's another bad fat for our brains found in cake, donuts, crackers, margarine, and even microwave popcorn. It's called trans fats. The researchers in Chicago decided to look at the people who loaded up on trans fats and those who avoided them. And the numbers were just the same. Those who avoided trans fats cut their risks dramatically. So after that, the folks at Kaiser Permanente decided to take a look at cholesterol. Bad fats raise cholesterol levels. They recruited more than 10,000 volunteers and measured their cholesterol levels. Some had lower cholesterol, some had a little higher, and some had very high levels of cholesterol. Then they looked at their likelihood of getting Alzheimer's disease. You can see the obvious pattern on the graph. If you have low cholesterol levels, then your Alzheimer's risk is relatively low. If you have high levels, your Alzheimer's risk is high. But the really interesting thing about this study is that the cholesterol tests were done when the volunteers were just 40 years old, predicting their risk of getting Alzheimer's some 3 decades later. So what is it about cholesterol that has such a big impact on brain health? It's as simple as your heart and your head. Cholesterol can not only clog the veins and arteries around your heart, it can also block the blood vessels in your head. And when you consider 20% of the blood flow coming out of the heart goes straight to the brain, and if you can't get blood and oxygen and nutrients to your brain, and have good blood flow carrying the waste away, guess what? The brain suffers, and suffers greatly. So if you have high cholesterol blocking the arteries going into your brain, you don't have good blood flow, and that's a real problem. But all cholesterol was not created equal. There's good cholesterol, HDL, and then there's bad cholesterol, LDL, and there's a world of difference between them. A recent study has shown that higher amounts of good cholesterol, the HDL, can help prevent Alzheimer's. Here's a video from CBS News featuring Dr. Jennifer Ashton, who talks about the different types of cholesterol and how to get more of the good cholesterol. There's been a lot of discussion lately about how a glass of wine can help protect your brain. Well, the researchers at the University of Cincinnati wondered if it was the alcohol or it was the grape. So they brought in a group of people who were all 78 years old. They all had a mild cognitive impairment, and they were starting to lose their memory. Researchers asked them to start drinking grape juice. How much? A pint a day, which is 2 cups. So they had 1 cup in the morning and 1 cup at night. Easy, right? The results showed that their ability to learn was much better. Their ability to recall was much better, and it was better very rapidly. Within a couple of weeks, it started improving. So why is this? Well, if you think about it, a grape is on a vine sitting in the sun all day with very little protection. It gets assaulted by the elements, so why doesn't it just wither up and turn into a raisin right there and then? The reason it can't survive is because it has something called anthocyanins. Anthocyanins are what make it that beautiful dark purple color. But it's not there just to make it look pretty. It's there to protect it. It's the same thing when you walk into a grocery store and you can see the orange carrots across the store 100 yards away, and you say, wow, that orange is beautiful, I've got to have some carrots. Well, guess what? That orange is beta-carotene that's there to protect the carrot. The tomatoes are so beautifully red as well. That's lycopene to protect the tomato. And that dark purple color is anthocyanin to protect the grape. And now when you eat these great vegetables, they pass into your body and go to your brain. The powerful antioxidants that protect the grape as it's growing also protects your brain. Let's talk about the other dark fruits you can add to your diet. What about blueberries? Same story. Researchers brought in a group of people and gave them a pint of blueberries every day. After a short while, their learning was also better, their recall was better. So these plants that have been with us for thousands and thousands of years, our bodies are designed to take advantage of these great nutrients in them, these antioxidants that you can get into your body, because your body knows what to do. But I think maybe modern life takes it all away from us. You eat a cheeseburger or fried chicken or a pizza, and there are no anthocyanins in those. And because of the ease of the modern diet, all these things that we've depended upon to protect our body for thousands of years have been stripped away. So the question is there something you can do to defend yourself and knock out these free radicals? Sure there is. There are hundreds and hundreds of superfoods that help you fight these free radicals. Antioxidants that are found in everyday ordinary foods like green vegetables, seeds and nuts, and vitamins. And if any of the vitamins needed by your body qualified as a superhero, it would be vitamin E. Vitamin E is a powerful antioxidant that protects your cell membranes from harm. Unfortunately, the only vitamin E cartoon I could find was Homer Simpson as Everyman, which, if you stop and think about it, may be even more appropriate than some nameless, faceless, generic vitamin E superhero. Anyway, vitamin E's villain would be free radicals, which are highly reactive molecules that are missing an electron. These villainous free radicals go berserk inside your body, madly searching for an extra electron to grab hold of. But as they bounce around on their mad search, they cause tremendous damage to everything they run into. Our superhero, vitamin E, is capable of donating electrons to the free radicals. This calms these free radicals down and stops their mad dash of destruction through your body. Well, you've no doubt heard the old expression, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, that old saying has never been more true. You see, apples are chock full of vitamin C, which is a powerful antioxidant that helps counteract the damaging oxidation caused by free radicals. One of the best explanations of oxidation I've run across is the browning of an apple. We've all cut open apples and see what happens to them. They turn brown, right? Well, that browning is oxidation. The oxidation produces a number of compounds, including a brown pigment called melanin. The longer the apple is exposed to the air, the more brown pigments are formed, and the darker the apple becomes. So a really cool experiment that you can do at home if you like is to compare the browning of an apple relative to the effects and effectiveness of antioxidants. And these are simple antioxidants that you have at home. First, you fill 3 glasses full of cold water. The first glass you leave alone and just have water in it. The second, you crush up an ordinary vitamin C tablet and stir that in there until it's dissolved. And in the third glass, you get a multivitamin, just a standard multivitamin. Crush it up, stir it in, and make sure it's dissolved. Then you drop your apple slices in. The next thing is to take the apples out, put them someplace so you can see what happens over the next 4 days. Look at figure 1. These are the 3 apples after 24 hours. On the left, the apple in water, in the middle, the apple dunked in vitamin C, and on the right, the multivitamin. Going to figure 2, this is 48 hours, 2 days. Water, vitamin C, and minerals. As you can see, huge difference. The vitamin C apple still looks pretty good. The other 2 quickly turning into mush. Figure 3, 72 hours, 3 days. Same thing. Vitamin C apple, still okay. The multivitamin is really going downhill quick, faster than just the apple and water. Experts say this is because the multivitamin contains traces of crude oil and heavy metals. What do you think those heavy metals are? Iron, copper. and that causes them to oxidize even faster than the one that's just dunked in water. But overall, you can see how effective vitamin C is at reducing the oxidative damage. Now, this is a really oversimplified example, but I think it illustrates both the process of oxidation and how a good antioxidant can help protect you. Even though it only accounts for about 2% of your body weight, your brain burns more than 20% of your body's total energy. Because it's such a power-intensive part of your body, diet is critical to your brain's health. Medical researchers have identified and extensively studied 3 diets that provide proper fuel that'll keep your brain running in top condition for years to come. First is perhaps the most well-known, the Mediterranean diet. The second is the DASH diet, or dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And the third is the newest. It's a combination of the Mediterranean DASH diet called the MIND. MIND stands for Mediterranean DASH Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, MIND, MIND. It's a mouthful, and I'm not just talking about the food. Okay, let's take a quick look at these diets, starting out with the Mediterranean. Green vegetables are a mainstay of the plant-based Mediterranean diet. A growing number of studies suggest that a Mediterranean diet may slow cognitive decline in older adults and help delay or prevent the progression of Alzheimer's disease. A med diet is not so much a measured, regimented diet or prescribed diet as it is a lifestyle choice, directing people to eat certain types of healthy food. The med diet is rich in monounsaturated fats, such as olive oil, nuts, and fish. Monounsaturated fats have proven to have an anti-inflammatory effect on the body, which may help fend off heart disease. A large and growing number of studies have looked at the positive health benefits of the Mediterranean diet. In fact, more than 500 studies were conducted in 2015 alone. In one of those studies, researchers from Columbia University Medical Center in New York followed more than 2,200 older people for 4 years, focusing on how a traditional Mediterranean diet affected brain health. It was one of the first studies focusing on the whole Mediterranean diet's effect on Alzheimer's, and not just individual types of food. To make sure they were healthy and lacked cognitive impairment, volunteers were given a battery of tests at the beginning of the study. Participants were then split into 3 groups according to how closely they followed the Mediterranean diet. After 4 years, 262 participants had developed Alzheimer's or dementia. Researchers found that people who most closely followed a traditional Mediterranean diet were 40% less likely to develop Alzheimer's than people who only loosely followed the Mediterranean diet. Another very encouraging thing about the Mediterranean diet is it's never too late to start to benefit from a dietary change. A Scandinavian trial looked at a group of people considered to be at risk of dementia who were between the ages of 60 and 77. Half the participants followed a standard diet, while the other half ate a modified Mediterranean diet and also took part in a low-impact exercise program. Well, as you can guess, the folks following the Mediterranean diet ended up doing substantially better, scoring 25% or more higher than folks who were following a standard low-fat diet. And the differences in memory improvement were even greater. The Mediterranean diet group scored 83% higher in executive memory test, and their processing speed was off the charts. It was 150% faster than the control group. And best of all, those improvements were apparent within just 2 years. Which brings to mind the question, when is the best time of life to start eating healthy? And when is it too late? Evidence from a couple recent studies shows that when it comes to making better dietary choices, the sooner the better. But it's never too late. A large study of more than 10,000 healthy women found that women who followed a healthy Mediterranean diet in their 50s and 60s were 40% more likely to be cognitively healthy and live totally disease-free past the age of 70. The researchers recorded the participants' diet and overall health patterns in the mid-1980s and then checked back with them 15 years later. They found that women who ate balanced, healthy diets were 34% more likely to age healthily than the women who didn't eat as well. Women following a Mediterranean diet did even better. they were 46% more likely to live disease-free well past the age of 70, avoiding such chronic illnesses as heart disease, diabetes, and Parkinson's disease. They also showed far less cognitive impairment compared to the unhealthy control group. Bottom line is, if you choose a Mediterranean diet, you really can't go wrong. You're picking one of the most well-researched, one of the healthiest diets known to man, one that will help protect your brain now and for years to come. Another popular diet that's shown promising results in reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's and dementia is the DASH diet. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It was created 25 years ago to help prevent high blood pressure. And best of all, it's easy to follow. U.S. News and World Report named the DASH diet the #1 best overall diet on its Best Diet Survey of 2017. The DASH diet was originally designed to lower sodium intake, which takes your blood pressure down. Because the DASH does such a great job of lowering blood pressure, several studies have shown that it's also good for the brain. High blood pressure is one of the leading causes of dementia and Alzheimer's. To check the cognitive benefits of the DASH diet, researchers in 2010 recruited 124 participants with high blood pressure who were sedentary and had body mass indexes between 25 and 44. Volunteers were randomly assigned into 3 groups for the 4-month study: a DASH diet but no exercise group, a DASH diet plus exercise group, and a control group that didn't exercise or follow the DASH diet. To measure changes, researchers took high-resolution ultrasound images of the volunteer's brain at the beginning of the study and then again after the 4-month intervention was over. They found that the DASH diet plus exercise group experienced significant improvements in neurocognitive function compared to the sedentary control group. The DASH diet plus exercise group scored an impressive 6.1 years younger. Conversely, the sedentary control group scored 11.7 years poorer on the same test. Similar results were found on a hand-eye coordination speed test. In addition, not surprisingly, volunteers following the DASH diet also had much lower blood pressure. The DASH diet and the Mediterranean diet are very similar. Both are based on heart-healthy eating habits that emphasize natural and processed foods rich in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and nuts. Both diets encourage eating unsaturated fats, good fats, and discourage eating saturated fats. Things like sugar and empty calories are strongly discouraged. And both really promote long-term lifestyle changes. The main difference between the DASH and the Mediterranean diet is that the DASH diet is more structured and emphasizes portion control and calorie restrictions, whereas the Mediterranean diet doesn't mention portion size or even recommend specific amounts of any food group. It's more of a lifestyle change, as we mentioned earlier. Another important distinction between the two diets is that the DASH diet allows for 2 to 4 servings of dairy products every day. Given the scarcity of dairy products in many parts of the Mediterranean region, many people who follow the Mediterranean diet often go days without any dairy. And while the DASH recommends a little bit of lean red meat, the Mediterranean diet mostly excludes red meat and instead recommends fish or seafood be eaten on a daily basis. Given their similarity, it's not surprising that several researchers have conducted head-to-head comparisons of the DASH and the Mediterranean diet. A 2014 study compared how effective the two diets were at slowing down cognitive decline in older adults. More than 800 older volunteers with an average age of 81.5 years were recruited for the study. Volunteers were broken down into 3 groups, depending on how closely they adhered to either the DASH or Mediterranean diet. Researchers tested the volunteers at the beginning of the study, then at 2 years, and again at the 4-year conclusion. They found that both dietary patterns resulted in slower rates of cognitive decline that were roughly the same. Brain testing scores for volunteers in the top percentile of the DASH group were at least 4.4 years younger than the lowest group. Because both diets are so similar, researchers suggest that the diets focus on natural, minimally processed foods as well as a reduction of saturated fats, may be more important than the specific diet. Do you remember when we were talking about the Chicago Memory and Aging Project a little while ago, and how they were doing all this scientific research back in the 1990s on the effects of diet on the brain? Well, one of those researchers, Dr. Martha Claire Morris, has taken those decades of knowledge and created a new diet designed to boost brain health. The MIND diet, which stands for Mediterranean-Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. Say that fast 3 times. Well, anyway, the MIND diet draws upon a growing body of research suggesting that certain nutrients, mostly found in plant-based food, help protect cells in the brain while fighting harmful inflammation and oxidation. Dr. Morris took 2 proven diets, the ones we just talked about, the DASH and Mediterranean diets, and zeroed in on the foods that she thought specifically affected brain health. The emphasis is on eating from 10 brain-healthy food groups, including at least 3 servings of whole grains, a salad, and 1 other vegetable every day, along with a glass of wine or grape juice. It also involves snacking most days on nuts and eating beans every other day or so, eating poultry and berries at least twice a week, and fish at least once a week. And another interesting thing is berries are the only fruit specifically mentioned by Dr. Morris in the MIND diet. She says blueberries are one of the most potent foods in terms of protecting the brain, just loaded with antioxidants. She says strawberries also perform well in past studies, as well as raspberries. And we're supposed to avoid foods from 5 unhealthy food groups, and this is where it gets a little challenging. Red meats, butter and stick margarine, cheeses, pastries and sweets, and last but not least, fried or fast food. So pretty much, if it tastes good, you need to spit it out. In 2015, Dr. Morse released a study that showed the results of more than 900 folks following this diet for 5 years. Researchers found that those study participants who closely followed the MIND diet for 5 years cut their risk of developing Alzheimer's by as much as 53%. Dr. Morse also compared the long-term effects of the Mediterranean, DASH, and MIND diet. She found that you really can't go wrong if you're following one of these diets. All 3 of them provided significant protection against Alzheimer's and dementia when followed closely. The Mediterranean diet lowered Alzheimer's and dementia risk by 54%. As I just mentioned, the MIND diet by 53%. And they found the DASH diet reduced the risk of developing dementia by 39%. However, they did find an important difference between the MIND diet and the other 2. Anybody who's ever dieted, they'll tell you it's hard to stay on a diet all the time. I mean, after all, we're only human, and sticking to a diet is pretty tough. But there's some good news for us slackers when it comes to the MIND diet. Dr. Morse found that protective brain benefits of the DASH and Mediterranean diet were negligible when participants only loosely followed them. But even a marginal compliance to the MIND diet lowered Alzheimer's risk by as much as 35%. Another positive finding was the longer people followed the MIND diet, the greater the cognitive benefits. The brains of those in the top third most closely following the MIND diet was an equivalent of 7.5 years younger than the bottom third. 7.5 years. What would you give for another good 7.5 years of cognitive function? And even the healthiest diet in the world doesn't do you any good if you don't follow it. Dr. Morris says a MIND diet is also easier to follow than the Mediterranean diet, which calls for a daily consumption of fish and 3 to 4 servings of fruit and vegetables every day. Which, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a pretty tall order to me. As much as I want to stay healthy and keep my brain sharp, I just don't know if I could do 3 or 4 servings of vegetables every day on top of a serving of fish. At the end of the day, the MIND diet, the Mediterranean diet, and the DASH diet are not all that different. and they're all likely to be helpful. I guess at the end of the day, the biggest question is, can we really prevent Alzheimer's disease? The biggest single risk factor is age. Right after age is genetics. But other risk factors tend to be modifiable, things we can do something about. Things like blood pressure, cholesterol, stroke, diabetes, and obesity. These are all things that we can affect, major risk factors. There are also protective factors we can do something about. Education is a big one. Something like, well, I don't know. How about taking an online course about Alzheimer's prevention? That's an excellent way to protect your brain. Anything that keeps our minds active. Intellectual things, reading, talking with people, doing crosswords, Sudoku, anagrams. These are things that exercise the connections between brain cells. The whole idea is to keep these connections alive and exercise them a little bit. And here's an interesting study. Have you heard that people who speak a couple of languages have less cognitive decline? Research shows that being bilingual can delay cognitive decline by about 5 years. If you have 3 languages, it's even better. Unfortunately, your high school Spanish won't help. It's got to be something that you do on an everyday basis. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you can always pick up a new language and just keep the neurons firing, and that keeps them healthy and resilient. Another big thing we can do to protect our brains is exercise. Breaking a sweat 4 or 5 times a week can lower your risk by as much as 50%. And when you add this to the protections that come from following a healthy diet, you're talking about significantly greater protection against these terrible diseases. Researchers at the Kansas University Alzheimer's Disease Center measured the aerobic capacity of some 500 people with and without Alzheimer's disease. They put them on treadmills and basically tested how fit their hearts and lungs were. They studied how this aerobic activity affected the brain and brain shrinkage, particularly in people with Alzheimer's. People with a higher fitness level, a higher aerobic capacity, had much less brain atrophy than those who didn't exercise and had low fitness levels. Their findings suggest physical exercise is medicine. It helps slow the disease down. It helps prevent cognitive problems in healthy people and also in people with Alzheimer's. The recommended amount of exercise is about 150 minutes a week. So 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week is the optimum amount that they've found. The bottom line is some exercise is better than none, and more is better. In a related study, researchers at the University of Illinois brought in 120 adults for an exercise trial. The volunteers started out at 10 minutes a day for 3 times a week, and then added 5 additional minutes every week until they worked their way up to 40 minutes a day. What those researchers found is that the brain shrinkage stopped, and the volunteers' memories got noticeably better, especially in the hippocampus, the part of the brain that decides what's worth remembering. So, what's the best way to start exercising again if, like me, you've fallen off the wagon and need to get started again? The first thing is to see your doctor to make sure your heart is up to it and to make sure your joints and your body is okay. Once you get that okay, start with a brisk 10-minute walk. Who can't do that? Then slowly work up to 15, 20, 25 minutes. Don't focus on distance. What you need to focus on is your pulse. You want your pulse to go higher, because if the pulse is higher, then you are oxygenating your brain. You're getting good aerobic exercise. So 10 minutes, 3 times this week, 15 minutes next week, and so on. And before you know it, you're up to 40, and that's a magic number. That's when studies show the brain is getting oxygenated and starting to make some real gains. Can you do more than that? Absolutely. The more fit you become, the more good you can do, up to a certain point. But you've got to listen to your body and maintain your common sense. If you start hurting, you need to stop. But again, a little is better than none, and more is better. The biggest thing is to get up and actually, to borrow the phrase from Nike, just do it. And that's it. End of lecture. We have come to the conclusion of this course of study on Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's prevention. Thank you for playing along. I hope you found some good information and it wasn't a total waste of your time. To be quite honest, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to put this stuff together. I think it's incredibly important, and Alzheimer's is the health epidemic of our time. For those of you who are new to all of this, try not to take in too much. Remember, the longest journey begins with but a single step. So just start thinking about things you can do in your everyday life, and I think it will become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you start, you'll start feeling better, and you'll take the next step, and before you know it, you'll be making a real difference with your brain health. So take action, fight Alzheimer's, and if you could indulge me, here's a link to a post-course survey. It's not graded. It's totally anonymous. It's just here to help me see what's working, see what's not working, and make this course a little bit better. Again, thanks, and best of luck moving forward.